Starting today, we're going to be doing a series of WebQuest activities about climate change and global warming. You're going to be accessing a few different websites and videos to help you understand why we're seeing such drastic effects due to a slight increase in the average temperature of the Earth and what actually causes that average temperature increase. So, to begin with, we have to discuss the atmosphere and how we're able to have life on Earth and how we're able to maintain the temperature of Earth. The sun is there to heat up the planet. The sun's rays not only carry light, they carry heat energy, and the heat energy, along with the light, is trapped by the atmosphere. Now, humans have been able to contribute to the retention of heat in the atmosphere by certain activities that we do. So first, global warming, climate change. You've probably heard both terms. It's more common nowadays to use the term climate change, and that's because most people are confused by the word global warming and how it's possible that while we do see cold winter days, why are we still calling it global warming? Well, we also use the terms climate change because it's not just an effect on the temperature of the Earth that we're seeing. We're seeing more precipitation in some areas. Other areas we're seeing less precipitation and a lot of droughts. And in some areas we're seeing severe storms, such as how Hurricane Harvey hit Houston a few years ago, and how we've also watched as Hurricane Maria hit Puerto Rico and caused massive damage. This all relates back to climate change. So while the Earth may be getting warmer, there are other effects to take into account as well. There are also effects on the ice caps and how they are reducing and how that's actually contributing even more to our current changes in climate. So first we have to understand a little background about the atmosphere. Without the atmosphere, Earth would not exist in the same way life on Earth would not be able to exist. And that's because the atmosphere is like a blanket to Earth. Now, in the winter, you use heavier blankets, and that's because when it's cold out, that heavier blanket allows your body heat to get trapped underneath and keep you warm at night. Our atmosphere is able to trap the heat energy from the sun and allow the temperatures to not change so drastically, so the temperatures don't get too cold or too hot. They are able to maintain certain levels so that life can exist. It's very much like a greenhouse, so we call this the greenhouse effect. Now, we can grow plants in different areas of the world rather than the areas that they're normally found in if we grow them in a greenhouse. Greenhouses are made of certain materials that allow the sun's rays to enter and then become trapped and keep a warmer climate inside the greenhouse than you may find outside. It slows the escape of the heat back into the atmosphere so that the plants inside the greenhouse can survive. The atmosphere does something very, very similar. So when the sun's radiation enters the atmosphere, it can become trapped, although some of it will escape and radiate back out into space so that we do not become too warm. However, that's changed over time. So our normal atmosphere is made up of 78% nitrogen gas, 21% oxygen, and then we see other gases such as argon, carbon dioxide, methane, and ozone. Now, carbon dioxide, methane, and ozone are known as greenhouse gases, and that's because they help trap the radiation from the sun. So the more of these gases you add, the more radiation becomes trapped, the higher the temperature. So the greenhouse gas effect also refers to Earth and how our atmosphere is very much like a greenhouse. It will let some of the radiation of the sun go back out into space, and some of it does become trapped. So in the case of gases like water vapor, carbon dioxide, methane, ozone, nitrous oxide, and more, the less you have or the more normal the amounts, the more likely it is you're going to allow some of the heat to radiate back out into space. However, the more carbon dioxide, methane, etc., that you add to the atmosphere, the more likely it is that heat will become trapped. And if the heat and the radiation of the sun become trapped, then you're going to start to see increases in the temperature of the Earth. Now, you must be thinking, why is that so negative? And that's what we're going to start to look at in this lesson. So, greenhouse gases can be released in many different ways. We see them being released when we have factories running, and they're not running in a way that prevents the use of fossil fuels. So if we're burning oil, if we're burning coal, if we're burning natural gas, and we're not using alternatives, we're going to release a lot of carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere through the burning of those fossil fuels. Same thing with cars, so it's recommended to use mass transit like the trains, buses, walk more, using a bicycle as alternatives so that we burn fewer of those fossil fuels and release less carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Also, growing livestock. So, growing cattle has increased a lot of greenhouse gases being released into the atmosphere and causing increases in our average temperature on Earth. We've talked about government has talked about more sustainable practices. However, we also have to take into account that many people make their living on raising livestock and agricultural practices, but there has to be a way of reducing the amount of methane and carbon dioxide being released by them. Another way that we've seen an increase in carbon dioxide is through deforestation. So by cutting down trees, we lead to more carbon dioxide being released back into the atmosphere. And that's because trees and other green plants use carbon dioxide to make food for themselves through photosynthesis. The more trees you're cutting down, the less carbon dioxide being used by them to make their own food. We've seen a lot of this rapidly, especially in the last 70 years or so, as we've used a lot more trees for building materials. A lot of people enter places like the Amazon rainforest and they cut down those trees because they want use for the land. They want the timber because it's a profitable material to sell off for buildings, and unfortunately we've started to see a lot of increases in carbon dioxide because of this. In future lessons in the next week, you're going to view a lot of graphs. I'm just going to show you starting from about 1960 here to present day. You can see that the carbon dioxide level is gradually increasing over time. The reason you're seeing a slight up and down each year is the increase in carbon dioxide happens when deciduous plants drop their leaves. So places like the northeast of the United States and other parts of the country, when the leaves drop, they're not taking in carbon dioxide. And since the leaves have fallen for the winter and due to less light and colder temperatures, carbon dioxide does go up during the winter months, and it does start to drop during the spring and summer months due to the leaves growing back and taking in more carbon dioxide. However, it's not enough to stop the increase due to fossil fuels and deforestation. Also, because of that carbon dioxide, you can see that there is a great change in the global temperature. That change especially started happening in the 1940s and onwards, when people started building out from the big cities more and going to live in suburbs. Those suburbs required more use of cars. More use of cars led to greater releases of carbon dioxide due to burning of gas, which is a fossil fuel. That's one big reason for the increase in carbon dioxide and the rise in temperature that we keep seeing over time, and how it got gradually worse over the last the ends of the 20th century into the 21st century. Now, the temperature change is about 0.9 degrees Celsius or 1.62 degrees Fahrenheit between 1860 and 2000. That may not seem like a lot to you, however, it has had drastic effects on the Earth that we're going to be taking a look at. People point to this small change and say, well, a very tiny change like that can't possibly be that drastic for Earth and the organisms and humans living on it. However, as I've said, there has been changes in the climate that have been negatively impacting humans as well as other organisms. So, as I've stated, the gases in the atmosphere retain heat. However, as we release more of the greenhouse gases, it's building up every single day, and through our activities of burning fossil fuels and other activities that humans go through, we are seeing a greater increase in the temperature. So what's the big connection here? How are we getting more heat, and what does this mean in terms of higher global temperatures? And why is it so bad that we're retaining more heat from the sun? So one effect is that the sea levels are rising. So as that temperature goes up, these polar ice caps on the north and the south side of the Earth are melting. As they're melting, we are seeing an increase in the rise of the sea levels, and that affects coastal areas. It could affect New York City one day, which I will show you pictures in the future of what New York City could look like many, many years from now, or really not that many. If we don't take any actions, places like Long Island, New York City can be covered in water. We've already seen a drastic decrease also in places like Greenland, which are mostly ice. This also affects organisms that need the ice. So, for example, polar bears rely on the ice. They go from one piece of ice to another as they're looking for food in the ocean. Without those pieces of ice, they have nowhere to rest, and this could affect them and their population numbers, as they may not be able to swim for those long distances to find another piece of ice to land on. Also, the ice is able to radiate more of the sun's energy back into space with less ice. The water is able to trap more heat, which also leads to more melting of the ice as well, leading to increased levels of increased sea levels, because the ice is not there to radiate that sun back out into space. So if the ocean temperatures rise, why is this so negative? So that can increase stronger hurricanes, as I've talked about before. Warmer oceans also leads to coral reefs dying. It's leading to the bleaching of them. Now, coral reefs are big communities of many different organisms, especially the algae that helps supply food for the coral reefs. If those algae die, then the whole coral reef community will die with it. Now, the increase in that we're seeing in really bad storms like Hurricane Sandy, Hurricane Maria, Hurricane Harvey are due to the evaporation. Now, as the temperature increases, we see more evaporation of water. As more and more water is evaporating, it condenses in the atmosphere and we see storms. The more water being evaporated, the stronger the storms. That's just something to take into account also when we look at higher temperatures on Earth. We may be seeing some strong storms in some areas, and other areas, due to that evaporation, due to higher temperatures, are actually seeing droughts, and that may be negatively affecting us because we're going to lose out on food. We're going to lose out on farmers being able to make money off of that because that's their livelihood. Those increased storms could also lead to more flooding in certain areas, which can damage homes and drive people out of their neighborhoods. as well. So, another negative to take into account.